recent news on Gaza has sparked an immediate reaction from the public, the media, and the rest of the world. In relevance to this, Ahlulbayt TV presents to you an exclusive interview with Tony Benn, discussing the issues taking place in Gaza and his views regarding this topic. To start off the interview, we asked Ben why he thinks these issues were initiated and what may have triggered them. We also asked him who he thought was responsible for the incidents taking place in Gaza.
The language used by the BBC about militant Palestinians and the Israeli government, I mean, the truth is that there's an elected government in Gaza and there are some militant Israelis who are trying to pursue their policy, which is to get military control of the whole of the old Palestine. And this is a tension that can only be resolved by dealing with the question as to whether Palestine is a single state or two states. If it's two states, will they negotiate? Will they negotiate in peace? And if that's the case, then Israel will be diminished in power. If Israel continues to dominate as a one-party state, then of course this will be a continuing battle with what they would describe as militants. I think it is an Israeli situation. I think Israel has been repressing the Palestinians and blockading Gaza and is engaged in a conflict with the people of Gaza, and the people of Gaza are right and the Israeli government are wrong. That's my opinion.
We were then interested to see Ben's views on the ceasefire and if maintaining a truce would make a difference to the situation.
Well, I mean, a ceasefire now might avert an immediate invasion of Gaza by the Israeli forces, which is the danger. And there are a lot of people now worried about that. And if we could maintain a ceasefire now for a little bit, there would be a bit more time to negotiate the real question, which is the blockade of Gaza, the rights of the Palestinians, the future of the state, and so on. But, of course, you won't solve those problems in a matter of weeks. So that the question of the ceasefire now is to prevent an Israeli invasion of Gaza. That is the immediate objective, I think, and I agree with that.
After hearing of Ben's views regarding Israel's possible invasion of Gaza, we asked if this could be prevented in any way and what precautions can be taken to avoid more chaos.
Well, the only people who really could prevent an Israeli invasion would be the Americans, I suppose, plus the Arab world. There's a lot of hostility in the new Arab world, the Arab uprising, the world of Tunisia and Egypt and so on, and that could play a part. But I think if the Americans said to Netanyahu, you cannot invade, then it would be very difficult for the Israeli government to do that. Trouble is the American president has been very sympathetic to Israel, and he ought to be more independent and critical and apply his power to bring about a settlement. Most Jews in America vote Democrat, and there's been a very strong pro-democratic or pro-Israeli element in the United States. And so really the job of President Obama should be to hold that in check so that an agreement can be reached. And America has used many United Nations vetoes to prevent resolutions going through which would have held the Israeli government in check. And so America has some responsibility for the crisis we now face. The American Jews have supported the Democrats, and the Democrats have always supported Israel. There have been many Democratic presidents. And so that's the situation, that America has really colonized Israel. Israel is an American colony in the Middle East. And that is the relationship of power that exists between the two of them. Well, the only way to solve any problem is to look at the really underlying problems and solve them. And the underlying problem is there is no Palestinian state. There is recognized in the United Nations, and that Israel is now dominating the territory of Palestine as if it was an Israeli colony. And apartheid is applied. If you're not a Jew, you're a second-class citizen. And this has created a great deal of resentment, quite apart from the blockade of Gaza, which has created a great sense of injustice as well.
Tony Benn stated his opinions on the Hamas government and what he thinks about the worldview regarding Israel's possible invasion.
The Hamas government was elected and has to be recognized as the government of Gaza. Now, it isn't the government of Palestine. One day maybe it will be, but it has got legitimacy in Gaza and has to be treated respectfully. And it has real problems with the Israelis which have to be dealt with fairly. And the Israelis killed 1,400 Palestinians 2 or 3 years ago when they invaded Gaza. And this will happen again if we don't stop a further Israeli invasion. World opinion, I think, is now much more sympathetic to Palestine than it used to be. And I think America might be influenced by world opinion. But the responsibility immediately rests upon the Israeli government and the American government. Those are the two governments responsible for the situation that we face.
As there are opposing views in terms of the Hamas government, we asked Ben if they played a role in the events that have taken place in Gaza and if they could have been made responsible.
It is an elected government, and what it does is for them to decide, and there may be faults in the way they govern, but they are the legitimate legal government of Gaza and must be treated with respect by the world. Well, of course, the number of Palestinians killed in Gaza now by the Israelis is far greater than the number of Israelis that have been killed by the rockets. But if we had a ceasefire, then the rocket shooting on both sides would have to stop. Well, it would open a space for negotiation. That would be all it would do, but it would prevent further murder by people engaged in conflict. It would stop that and provide a little bit of time for people to think and say, what else could we do? Well, I think there is, but it does involve pressure being put on both sides, really, pressure on the Israeli government to recognize Palestine and lift the blockade on Gaza, and pressure on the government of Gaza not to continue with the rocket attacks.
Tony Benn was then asked about the media coverage and his opinions on the events that have been broadcasted.
The British media are almost unanimously in favor of Israel. And the language used, you see, the government of Israel, the Gaza militants, is designed just to give one impression that you have got a government dealing with rebels instead of two governments that have got to agree with one another. And the British press is very, very pro-Israeli. But I think the public are beginning to be more sympathetic to the Palestinians. Certainly the media coverage would be much better if it was balanced. And secondly, people have to recognize it is a settlement that has to be reached between two peoples, between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And the United Nations has a role to play here. And you cannot leave it simply to the strength of Israel, the military strength of Israel, imposing its will on Palestinians who have no rights. Well, the first step is for the case to be understood, for there to be proper treatment of the news. And the coverage I've noticed in the last few days has been so outrageously propagandist for Israel that has to be changed, and that can be changed by the media. Then you have to bring out the real arguments, the rights of the Palestinians to a state. Why is there not a state of Palestine in the United Nations? Because Israel objects and have persuaded the UN not to go along with it. And then when you have a Palestinian state, then its rights have to be laid down. And then these have to be negotiated with Israel. And then there's a possibility of a peaceful settlement. But it's a very, very difficult job. It's one of the most central questions in the world, as well as in the Middle East.
As there has been conflict within the public on either side, we asked Ben about his opinions on the techniques that could be used to dismantle this conflict.
It's a question of people's understanding of what's really happening. If you have two understandings, then you get a difference of opinion. And the plain fact is that the Israeli government have conquered most of Palestine and are governing it and occupy part of it that doesn't belong to them, and are applying pressure on Gaza, where there is a Palestinian community with an elected leadership. And that is the immediate crisis. But it will involve a huge change of attitude by the Israeli government and the Israeli people, and we shall see in the Israeli elections in January what the Israeli people feel about this, because they're not all sympathetic to the policy of apartheid that is followed by the Israeli government.
We were interested to see if Ben thought that Israel had in fact a right to behave in this manner, and if he could possibly see their point of view.
I think what Israel is doing is an act of aggression and contrary to international law, and another invasion of Gaza, which is being spoken of by the Israelis, would be an absolutely major crisis, because it would trigger off the whole crisis in the Middle East with Syria and so on. It could become something really, really big. And don't forget, the Israelis also want to attack Iran, and that is a terrible danger. That could begin the Third World War, I think, if a nuclear Israel attacked Iran. Really, really frightening. I think American opinion is very nervous of an attack by Israel upon Iran because of the fear of what would happen. That you'd have the whole Muslim world up in arms, and that would be a situation the American government would not like to see happen. Well, it's not playing any part, except it's come out in favor of a short-term ceasefire, which might avert an invasion of Gaza, but would only give you a moment to think about the very things we've been talking about. I think the British government feels that it cannot disagree with the United States because America is a dominant power and we have a subordinate role.
We then inquired about the possible strategies that could be used to change the current situation and how the general public can help the civilians in Gaza.
Well, you change everything by argument and campaigning and so on. There is a Palestine Solidarity Committee in Britain, of which I'm a member, and yesterday there were 4 big meetings in London, Edinburgh, Cardiff, and I forget where else. There were 4 huge demonstrations in support of Palestine, and I think that is beginning to have quite an effect on public opinion in Britain. Supporting the Palestinian case and make it so strong in Britain that no government could disregard it and ignore the Palestinian case. If that happened, then of course there would be a change. And I hope that this comes out in the political discussions in Britain, because certainly I'm very well aware of the support there is for the Palestinians, but it's never been articulated and argued as clearly as it should be. Well, there are some people who are hostile to my opinions on this, but strangely enough, although my opinions are criticised by the right wing in Britain for various things, on the question of support for the Palestinians, I can't say that I have been very much criticised, because I think the people at the top understand there is a lot of sympathy for the Palestinians, and therefore the view I put forward is really a view that it's difficult to attack in Britain.
Tony Benn expressed his thoughts on what Israel is hoping to achieve in preparing troops to enter Gaza and what possible problems this action can cause.
Well, I think the aim of doing it is to frighten the government of Gaza into stopping the rocket attacks. And that's the short-term object, but the real object is to gain control of Gaza again and deny the Palestinians the right to govern Gaza. And it would be the logical step following the blockade, because a blockade is an act of war designed to crush a country that is blockaded, and I think an invasion is the next stage above that. So I think this would have to be seen as being part of a new, much harsher Israeli strategy towards the Palestinians. But it won't solve the problem, it'll make it worse. It'll make it worse because the Palestinians are a very determined group of people, and they don't intend to give up. And they've never given up, despite all the pressure on them, the military pressure, the occupation, the partition, and so on. And I have a huge confidence in the people of Palestine to stand up for their rights. And I think if they do that, the Israelis will not be able to succeed.
Because of the fact that both parties are in fact firing at each other, we asked Ben how he thought each party's reaction should be towards one another.
Well, there is a state of war going on between the Israeli militants and the Gaza government, and that is the rockets and all the rest of it. And that they cannot be tackled by themselves unless there is a permanent settlement between the two sides, and that is what we're working for, an understanding, and that would involve major concessions by the Israelis and no doubt some changes of policy by the Gaza government. There have been quite a number of support projects. George Galloway, who was an MP, went over and led a group of lorries and ambulances. And so I think an appeal made by the people of Gaza to the people of Britain would get a good response. But of course it's about money. It's not just the response, it's about the money and the actual physical materials and how you get through the blockade. Well, there are many injustices in the world that we have to live with, and one of the great injustices is the injustice done to the Palestinians. But only a limited number of people will be involved. But when the argument is put to them, they do respond, they do send money, they do send goods, and I think that is a hope we can build on. But it's a battle the Palestinians have to win for themselves, of course. Nobody else can solve the problem. We can help them, but this is a battle the Palestinians have to win for themselves.
After hearing about the battle that Palestine is trying to beat, we inquired about the help that Israeli civilians might require and if they too have a battle to face.
Well, the Israelis are in a very powerful position. They're very well armed. They're members of the United Nations. They've got allies in the world. And they're using their power to advance their own interests in Palestine. But I think if you go around the world and talk to people, you will find most people in the world sympathize with the Palestinians. And that is a force, a political force that has to be mobilized if you're going to bring about a change of policy by the Israeli government. Well, it's not hostility to the Jews, it's hostility to the policy of the Israeli government. And I think that people do have to make up their mind. In South Africa, people had to make up their mind, did they support the whites or did they support the blacks? And they supported the blacks, and the blacks won. And if you take so many historical examples. Long-term battles are being fought all the time, and in the end you very often have a success because of the strength of opinion in support of those campaigns. I mean, after all, the right to vote, we had to fight for that, the right to trade unions, the right to women having the vote, the right to health care. All these battles have to be fought against a hostile press and hostile interests. And I think the one lesson we should learn from our history is if you believe something is right, go on campaigning for it. You may not always succeed, but the fact you're doing it inspires other people and encourages other people to join you and come along with the same campaign.
We then asked Ben if he felt any sympathy towards the Israeli civilians and if he could possibly understand both sides of the argument.
Well, I was sympathetic at the time of apartheid and of the German hostility to the Jews. I was sympathetic to the idea that some Jews should go and live in Israel, in Palestine. And so this has never been a hostility on my part to the Jews. It's been a hostility to the policy of a certain section of Jewish opinion represented by the Israeli government, which has gone in there and taken the whole thing over and made it into an Israeli colony. And the Palestinians are repressed and held down, and they have no rights, no proper rights there. And then you have the conflicts over the rockets and the invasion, and could head to a much, much bigger crisis in the Middle East. I was always very sympathetic to the Jews as Jews in finding some way of getting round the problems created by the German policy towards the Jews. And when Israel came to be founded, I thought this is a good sign, but I do remember that in the 1930s, the Arabs objected to the number of Jews that were going, and there was a conflict called the Arab Revolt against the British government, which governed Jordan and Palestine. And so there's always been, for a long, long time, a source of tension between the governing power and the two interests, and we mustn't expect that to be resolved quickly. Well, if the Israeli government invade Gaza for the second time, then I think it will become a very, very big crisis and may get involved in the Syrian situation and so on. The whole Middle East will be in danger of going into flames, and that's the thing we must try to prevent immediately, but that's only a start. Until you get justice for the Palestinians, you'll never get peace there. You campaign for it and you argue for it and support people who want it, and gradually create a situation where the British government doesn't support the Israelis. Get a situation where the Israelis begin saying this policy we're following is losing us support. We've got to think of changing the policy, bring the United Nations in, bring Palestine in as a state, a full state, into the UN, able to argue its case. I mean, it's a long campaign of history, and lots of campaigns have been like that. It is not the first one. But this is a particularly relevant one because of the weapons. The weapons at the disposal of the human race now are so dangerous that you have to treat every crisis like this crisis like this has to be taken very, very seriously indeed. I mean, I'm not in Parliament anymore. I did 52 years in Parliament. I do public meetings, and sometimes the press pick it up. And I find going around doing meetings on this, there's a lot of support, British opinion supporting the Palestinians when the argument is explained to them. And I think also people are very frightened of what Israel may do, particularly on Iran. So there is an anxiety about Israeli policy that goes over and above the anxiety about their attitude to the Palestinians. And these are major world issues that have to be dealt with by statesmen of the world in a sensible and serious way. Well, the argument against Hamas is that it is weakening the Israeli government and development in Israel and so on, and will have to be stopped. And they're violent people, and these are the arguments that are used all the time. You only have to call somebody a terrorist, or if he believes in military force, a violent person or an extremist, and you can build up hostility to it. After 9/11, the word terrorist was used to cover anything people disagreed with. And I think you have to get people to understand that Hamas is a serious, elected majority government protecting the people of Gaza, and they are entitled to the same respect and as is given to the Israeli government. And these are logical things that can be argued openly, and if you argue them, people will come round to support that view. Anyone can take whatever view they think is right in politics. Argument has two sides, and people make up their mind what they're in favour of. And I understand, of course, there are supporters of the Israeli government, and they therefore support them in their dealings with Hamas. But I'm giving you my opinion. Of course, I understand both sides. There would be no problem if there weren't two sides. If everyone took one view, we would not have a crisis.
Yeah, Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I join my colleagues today from both sides of the aisle to stand with the people of Israel in support of their sovereign right to defend themselves against Hamas terror. Over the past year alone, Hamas has launched approximately 900 rockets and artillery shells from Gaza into Israel's civilian neighborhoods. My colleagues think for just a minute whether or not rockets were coming from Mexico or from Canada. We would not stand for it for 1 minute. This week we saw them Hamas fire rockets that struck as far north as Tel Aviv. And today we have disturbing reports that at least one rocket hit near Jerusalem, the seat of Israel's government, and a city holy to Jews, Muslims, and Christians alike. That Hamas would specially target Israel's parliament building, as reports indicate, shows the great disregard Hamas has for the very idea of democracy, which does not exist in Gaza. By strengthening United States' relationship with Israel, this Congress will send a powerful message to Hamas and all in the region who would cause Israel harm. The right of self-defense cannot be allowed to go unexercised by a government dedicated to the protection of its people. We will stand with Israel, and we will also, Mr. Speaker, and I thank you for the time, lament the loss of life of Palestinians. Every life is important. So it is not that we stand unsensitive or insensitive to the lives of Palestinians, but they need to stop the violence and the attacks. Israel has the right to defend itself, and we will stand with them. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The campaigns that I mentioned, the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, is a strong campaign led by very responsible and serious people, and it's organizing meetings all over the place. And when I go to these meetings, I hear the discussions and so on. We need more campaigns like that. And those campaigns are also international, because the Palestinian Solidarity Committee has links with friends of Palestine around the world, and gradually build up a body of opinion in support of Palestine. But then also the danger to the world if Israeli policy develops particularly in relation to Iran and so on, is such that you then will get a lot of support against that line of Israeli policy, quite apart from the support for the Palestinians, because after all Israel is a major state and what it does will affect us all. And so I think the popular judgment on these matters will lead people to the right conclusion.
Ben spoke of the activities that he was engaged in, as well as his political views. We also inquired about the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign and what encouraged Ben to join such an organization.
It is a campaign set up by a number of very distinguished people who got together and discussed it as we've been discussing it today, and decided that what was needed was a very strong organization in support of the Palestinians. And it publishes material, it publishes leaflets, it organizes conferences and meetings and keeps up to date. And it's a very useful body. It had yesterday, as I said, in 5 major rallies in London and elsewhere in support of the Palestinians at this moment. And that is the contribution that campaign makes. But it's only a part of a much bigger world campaign where you talk to other nations and try to get them to persuade their governments to take action that is fair. I was a member of Parliament for 2 places, first for Bristol and then for Chesterfield, and I was engaged in all the domestic and international campaigns in which I believed. My prime interest for a long time was African freedom, because during the war I learned to fly in Zimbabwe. And when I was in Zimbabwe, no blacks had the vote, and it was an oppressive regime. And so when I got into Parliament, I worked for all the liberation movements, the black liberation movements, and that brought me in touch with a lot of very important people like Nelson Mandela, for example, who worked so hard against apartheid. And so that's how my political ideas developed. I'm a socialist. I believe in a different sort of world where money doesn't control everything, and people's concerns should be about people's needs for homes and jobs and proper income and health care and education, and you should judge a society in that way. And I think those ideas are very strong as well against the global capital, which dominates everything and judges everybody and everything in profit and loss. You ought to look in terms of need. And if you do that, you get a better world. I mean, that's my political philosophy in a nutshell. My dad was a Labour MP, and when I was very young, I was involved as a very small boy in the Spanish Civil War, and I remember the growth of fascism. And so I became, even when I was quite young, when I was 10, I campaigned in the general election, and I still have the literature I pushed out. One of the leaflets was about the number of people who died in the mining industry. Nearly 1 million had died in 10 years. And so I became very much involved with the miners. And that's how all people's ideas develop out of experience. You see something happen, you think about it, you reach a decision about it, you decide to do something about it, and that's how your opinion is formed. The division of Gaza from Israel is part of the problem, that the Israelis don't want to have to absorb and deal with large numbers of Palestinians inside Israel. So we are not talking about relations between Gaza and Israel, although we are about immediately, but that's part of the bigger problem of the rights of Palestinians in what is the state of Israel, and what is the future of the state of Palestine. What leadership does it have? What support does it get? What does it want to do? Could we make peace? These are all the political questions we have to consider. I think the future lies in a Palestinian state, recognized, in the situation under which the Palestinians get equal rights in Israel with the Israelis. And I believe that there has to be a return to the frontiers of 1948, and the Israelis have to withdraw from the occupied territories, and the Palestinians have to be able to develop their own institutions there. And if they do that, they've got the people of Gaza to help them, and we will see a change in the balance of power between Palestinians and Jews. Well, amazing things happen. Who would have thought apartheid would end? Who would have thought that a black would be elected President of the United States? I think you have to believe you have to have hope. Hope is a very, very important force in the world, because if you don't have hope, people don't make the effort. If you think you're going to lose, you wouldn't put the effort in. So those who spread pessimism or doubt are really spreading instruments in support of the other side, and you have to be aware of that.